the current season of 2022. And look, we're relatively optimistic with China. What we're seeing is their own domestic production of premium fruit, premium apples that is down around 30%. What that's done is driven demand for premium imported apples, and I think for New Zealand and also for us here at Mr. Apple, that's a great opportunity to fill that gap, I guess, where that's short. There's disruptions in the supply chain, which I think is a global issue, which everyone is seeing, and I think everyone is just managing it on both sides, both on the exporters and on the importers. Everyone's just managing it as best they can. It's not perfect, but I think we've come to understand the world we live in currently.
The outlook for this year has been challenging for a number of table grape growers in Australia. First of all, there's been some climatic conditions throughout our spring where we've gone through a La Nina weather pattern. Now, whilst there's been no rain in the table grape growing regions, it has created a weather pattern where we've had very cool spring weather. And as a result of that, it has delayed the maturity of the grapes for all the growers. So potentially we're about 3 to 4 weeks behind where we would normally be in our current season. So having said that, though, there's been no impact on the maturity in terms of their growing stages and also of how the grapes are looking in terms of presentation. So being 2 to 3 weeks behind, we are kicking off our harvest in earnest now, and there is an expectation that hopefully that the grapes will be harvested from the vines. Having said that, though, there's been some challenges with labour. Australia's had some labour issues. No doubt every country's had labour issues as well, but Australia's facing a lot of labour issues in horticultural regions. At the moment, most of the growers are saying they've got about 50% of their normal workforce. So as a result of that, it is taking longer also to get the grapes off the vine. But going around the growers right now, there's a lot of harvest happening. There's a lot of fruit coming off. The fruit looks very, very good quality. So the expectations from now will be that we will be sending a lot of fruit overseas to our export destinations, where a lot of countries accept Australian grapes. And from now, we expect to see a very good season going forward.
Bueno, esta temporada ha sido una temporada muy compleja, con muchas cosas anexas y absolutamente inesperadas. Por mucho que uno suele haber planificado el tema de materiales, el tema de transporte, ha resultado todo mucho más complicado y más difícil finalmente de lo planificado. Va a haber, desgraciadamente yo creo que va a haber muchos productores bien con muchos problemas, con muchos daños finalmente al final de temporada. Los cereceros más tardíos, algunos manzaneros, que son los que se están viendo más complicados con el tema de aumentos de costos dentro de Chile y los costos logísticos de los fletes que hacen inviable o muy complicado las exportaciones a algunos mercados más lejanos. Pero también veo oportunidades. Chile está más cerca que nunca en los últimos años de firmar el System Approach para el mercado de Estados Unidos con uvas de la zona norte. En el tema también de las uvas veo un gran desarrollo que ha habido en los últimos años, las variedades nuevas. El año pasado el 33% de los exportados por Chile fue en variedades nuevas. Este año esperemos llegar a 40-45%. Y eso en algunos mercados está permitiendo recuperar precios y recuperar rentabilidades que nos permitan pagar todo el aumento de costos de materiales, de mano de obra y de fertilizantes y insumos que tanto han subido este año.
This last season, Peru had a growth of 35% compared to the previous year, with totaling something close to 220,000 tons of blueberries exporting, being for the third consecutive year the largest exporter in the world. This growth has come despite all the logistic issues we have had, and all the world has had. And our export season is mainly concentrated between the months of August and December. We had 16 consecutive weeks from 33 to 48, week 48, with over 5,000 tons in shipments. Now, the period of our main production from August to December concentrates roughly 90% of the total exported blueberries. Now, for China, the growth. China is our third most important market, followed by the U.S., which has 55% of the share. Europe, which has 30%. As a whole, as a continent, and China holding 12%. However, China has been the market with the highest growth in Peru. We grew 68% versus last year, totaling 27,000 tons exported during the 21-22 season, more than any other market.
Season is looking pretty good just from a production perspective. It's a little bit early to make a call on the oranges. We're still quite some time away from that. But we have started on the lemons in South Africa and on the grapefruit. And so far, the crop that's hanging looks pretty good. It looks like we'll have a normal to slightly bigger than normal crop. Nothing huge, but it looks like a really good crop that's in the production side. There are still some shortages of water in certain areas, but definitely enough water to raise this crop. But for the long-term future, we obviously need some good rainfall in some of the more northern areas. There's probably going to be a slight growth in oranges for exports for this season. I would guess around 5% on the orange crop. Our biggest increases are obviously going to come on new plantings, which is majority mandarins, and on the lemons. We're going to have a challenging season this year. Initially, when I started looking into this talk, I was quite excited, and then it felt like a bit of a hospital pass after a while when I started looking at how challenging our season ahead is looking. But I think it's looking pretty similar for the rest of the world. So we have a positive outlook, and South Africa has always been a fairly dynamic country that takes well to challenges. So yeah, we're going to obviously go into it as best we can. We've had huge increases in fertilizer costs. Fertilizer costs have doubled. Agrochemicals have gone up by 30% or by 50% in South Africa. Fuel costs on our side have gone up by 30%, which obviously adds a huge amount onto the costs of the fruit. As everyone is well aware, the shipping costs have also gone up between sort of 20 and 30%, depending on the routes that you're taking. So it's going to be very, very challenging to produce the fruit and to get it exported at a cost that is viable.
Well, I think we've seen over the last 10 years with China, the pace of the changes has been so rapid that it's hard to see that slow down or stop. So for sure, I think the next 5 years we'll see the continual development, particularly with the online sales, which we've seen huge growth over the last 10 years. I think that'll continue. And so I guess for the rest of the world and for us here in New Zealand, it's about how you optimize that. How do you make how do you recognize the trends, the changing trends and consumer behavior within China, and how do you adapt your business to sort of suit that? And I think that's kind of the exciting thing with China is it's never 2 days the same, never 2 years the same. It always keeps evolving and changing. And I think you have to keep speed, and that's quite hard at times, but it's also quite exciting. And I think we're pretty excited about the future of China, and I think it's as it continues to evolve and the speed of change, we have to evolve with it.
That's a very good question, and that is a concern to the Australian industry, because China takes at least 40, or has traditionally taken 44% of our exports. There has been some geopolitical issues with China initially, starting back 2 years ago, but that was probably a lot of that had to do with the COVID outbreaks. There were a lot of Chinese importers that would come to Australia to see the grapes on the vine from the farms firsthand. That has now ceased because of travel restrictions. Going forward, we will have some difficulties with China in terms of having those relationships and those networks continuing that we've had in the past over the next, say, 12 months or the following year. I would expect that to settle down in a couple of years' time. So the outlook would be that whilst we will still continue to send to China, because there's always that strong demand from China for Australian grapes, the volume that we will be sending to China over the next, say for this season and potentially next season, would be down potentially by about 20%, 30% to China. There is that strong demand, as I mentioned. So hopefully when travel is allowed again, the restrictions are removed and we get back to normal trading conditions, I would expect the relationships with China to improve and our volumes to improve. But we'll have this sort of decrease over the next 1 to 2 years.
Con respecto a la temporada china, podemos decir que a pesar de todo lo que se esperaba en un inicio, que iba a ser muy complicada, el tema logístico, el tema de la aduana, el tema de los virus vegetales, la primera parte, hasta cercano al año nuevo chino, fue bastante bueno los resultados, sobre todo en las variedades más tempranas. Después del año nuevo chino y los barcos que se atrasaron, los barcos que llegaron muy cercanos al año nuevo chino, los resultados yo creo que van a ser muy malo. Y para adelante, bueno, el próximo año tenemos el año nuevo chino que es incluso antes que este año, 23 de enero. El tema logístico, si no lo solucionamos, el tema de los puertos de Chile, el tema de la demora de los barcos y la logística de la aduana en China, yo creo que a partir de los envíos del 15 de diciembre en adelante, incluso antes, podemos repetir algo como este año. Entonces el llamado es a los clientes chinos, a nuestros socios allá, a que trabajen con la aduana, a que volvamos a tener lo que era en los años anteriores, de que el tránsito entre Hong Kong y Shenzhen y Guangzhou principalmente era muy fluido, y eso permitía que la fruta llegara muy fresca, mucho más fresca de lo que estaba llegando hasta ahora, y permitía que el movimiento fuera mucho más rápido y con mejores resultados para todos. Para el gobierno chino, a través de la recaudación de mayores impuestos, para los clientes chinos que nos pueden cobrar sobre un mejor precio, para los clientes finales chinos también que reciben un mejor producto, y finalmente para los productores chilenos que pueden recuperar sus inversiones que se han hecho todos los últimos años en la cereza.
I think the logistic challenges and the political turmoil are affecting not only China, but all the world. It's one of the main issues, especially us in the southern hemisphere, where we are kind of far from the main markets. It's the logistic issue are becoming one of the biggest issues we have to face. China, in particular, has an extra difficulty because of the transit times we face. The transit time to China requires very special kind of quality, and why not a special variety that could make good arrivals and with the attributes that China has, with the China values. With these being said, we do consider China one of the markets that should have a big increase again for this upcoming season. My estimate would be that it should be between 20 or 25% of increase, given the export companies here are very focused into better serving China with their varieties and their quality. So we should see an increase in China, and more so at the initial part of the season, call it July, August, and September. That would be where China would be receiving the highest volume.
On the trade with China side, we're optimistic, but cautiously optimistic, because China is obviously having another wave of COVID, which is causing quite a lot of backlog and everything in China. They still have a zero policy on COVID, yet down in the south especially, they're having a huge amount of new infections. I know that recently Hong Kong shut down their ports and they requested shippers to start looking at the southern ports of China as opposed to Hong Kong. So that's going to push a lot more cargo to the ports of Shenzhen, to Sheko and to Nansha, which is going to add some bottlenecks. On the South African side, we have a huge shortage of containers. Historically, we shipped about 92,000 containers, and that's just on the citrus. This year, with the increases on the mandarins and lemons, we're probably looking at over 100,000 containers. And in a challenging year with shortages of containers, fewer lines calling the ports of South Africa, to find an extra 10,000 containers is going to be a tall order. So yeah, we're going to have a challenging season. But China is a huge market to us. I mean, they have a big growing middle class. They're South Africa's third largest trading partner, if I'm not mistaken, with about 220,000 tons of that's all citrus, not just oranges, but oranges is a big part of that. It's probably about almost half of the volume that goes into China is oranges, with the split between Valencias and navels being about 2/3 on the Valencias and about 1/3 on the navels.
Well, India for this year and next year, well, particularly for this year, what we're seeing is a huge increase in cost around shipping, and what they've done is sort of it's slowed the demand a little bit for apples out of the southern hemisphere. I think ability to get fruit to market and at a cost or at a price that would that is what the Indian consumers importers are looking for is quite challenging. But more so that I think there's a large overhang of northern hemisphere fruit. What we're seeing in northern hemisphere is a large crop of fruit, particularly raw gala and smaller sizes, and a lot of that has ended up into India, and so we're seeing there's still enough stock and supply to last them through, say, May or June. So from a New Zealand perspective, it's okay. We're looking a bit later and then it's focusing more on that sort of later part of the year, that sort of May onwards, when that northern hemisphere fruit would have slowly gone through the system and we see demand start to slowly increase. But again, the challenge will be around how does the pricing work within market when we have to allow for the additional cost of freight.
The Indian market hasn't been a strong market for Australian grapes, whilst we do have access now, and that access has improved where we can do in-transit cold treatment. There is a need now for the Australian industry to develop strong relationships and networks with the Indian importers and retailers. That is a priority that our industry is focusing on. So I would predict over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years that we will have increased exports to India once we develop those strong relationships. And once the Indian consumers get accustomed to Australian grapes and the quality that we can produce, the maturity and the sweetness in particular that we can produce, also the different varieties, I could see that Indian market increasing. The only disadvantage would be that there is an overlap of the Indian table grape season, domestic season, with our current domestic season as well. So that would probably take, in effect, the first 2 or 3 months of our season. So from about March onwards, I see a large opportunity in the future for Australia sending grapes to India.
We were allowed into India last year in September 2021. For that last part of the season, since we were allowed into that market, we exported only 30 tons of fresh blueberries, mainly to Mumbai and New Delhi. All these were air shipments, given that the transit times for the ocean containers, it will take way too much time, and we needed to assure the good quality arrivals into that market. The experience, I think, has been very good. It is a market with a lot of potential, and we do expect to keep growing that market. However, I see most of the shipments would be done still by air.
India is, like China, a very big market with a big growing middle class, I mean, the second biggest population in the world, we haven't found that much traction in India as South Africa, as we've seen in China. But I think that there is still tremendous growth that we'll experience in that market. At the moment, India is only South Africa. I think it's our 18th largest trading partner with only 18,000 metric tons of fruit going into the market. But we saw growth from 2020 into 2021, going from 8,000 tons to 18,000 tons. So it's a market with great potential, but also with a lot of challenges. Shipping to India requires either land-based cold sterilization, which is 10 days in South Africa before we can even ship. And as I mentioned on China, we have huge challenges with space and infrastructure in South Africa. So there are very few terminals that want to give you access to a cold store for 10 days to land-based steri your fruit, as opposed to China, which is in-transit steri, which means we can steri en route to the Chinese market. The other option is methyl bromide fumigation in South Africa, which is one of their requirements to ship fruit to there. The challenge with that, though, is it's quite hard on the fruit. It reduces your shelf life quite dramatically. But I think one of the biggest challenges with pushing more fruit into China and really stimulating that market is also South Africa not having a free trade agreement with China. We have a big challenge.
India tiene un potencial gigantesco para Chile, pero primero tenemos que resolver el tema logístico. India se nos hace mucho más lejos que otros países que quizás no son tan lejos. Este año en manzanas, que es uno de los principales productos, llevamos prácticamente un cuarto de las exportaciones que lo que llevamos al año pasado a igual fecha. Lo único que ha crecido básicamente son cerezas a la fecha comparado con el año pasado y nueces, pero lo necesitamos para los kiwis, lo necesitamos para las manzanas, lo necesitamos también en menor medida para las uvas, pero con su lejanía, con el tiempo tránsito hoy día aún más largo de lo que es habitualmente y el costo de los fletes, que se fueron a más del doble, ha sido muy difícil poder llegar a acuerdos con los clientes indios, a pesar de toda la insistencia y todo el trabajo que hacen ellos para que los abastezcamos.